The EarthBound fanbase is honestly the only community I consider myself a part of. Everyone in it is always so passionate about these 3 games, so it really feels like a united community. It's legitimately amazing. And because of this passion, fans have made their own games inspired by the Mother series. In fact, there are tons of them out there. But back when the fan base was much smaller, ROM hacks were quite prevalent, some even dating back to the early 2000s. People would take EarthBound and use its assets to morph it into something completely different. And in 2008, one of the most notable examples of this was released, the EarthBound Halloween Hack. This hack was in fact written and programmed by none other than Toby Fox when he was a mere 17 years old. Before this, he dabbled in RPG Maker but never completed any projects, although he did release an EarthBound hack in 2006 called Arn's Winter Quest, but it didn't garner much attention. It wasn't until the Halloween hack where he gained a bit of notoriety within the community. He created the game in a program called PK Hack, which was made specifically for editing the EarthBound ROM. From what I understand, it wasn't coded very well and was extremely difficult to use. Toby had to create characters, write a script, compose original music, and build it all in an unstable program. He definitely worked hard on it, and from what I can tell, the reception was quite positive from the EarthBound community. And if you read this article that Toby wrote describing the hack and its development, you can tell that he was proud of what he had made. But it's been over a decade since then, and Toby has gone on to much bigger things with the release of Undertale in 2015. In fact, he doesn't like acknowledging the hack's existence at all. The only thing I could find regarding his current opinion on it is a Twitter post where he called it, quote, a bad ROM hack with swears. This made me a bit concerned. Was it going to be overly edgy for no reason? Now sometimes that is very much the case, but it's not that cut and dry. This game is certainly an interesting one, so let's talk about it. This is the EarthBound Halloween Hack. The game is set in an alternate timeline from the original EarthBound, one where the 4 heroes, Ness, Paula, Jeff, and Pooh, never made it back alive during the fight with Gygus at the end of the original game. This tragedy ended up causing a depression throughout the land. You start the game in Tucson during the fall, and you'll be playing as an original character named Varrick, who is a bounty hunter. But I never would have guessed that. He just looks like an emo kid in shoulder pads if you ask me. You wake up and are instructed to see Tucson's mayor. He then informs you about a monster that, get this, tore a girl's parents apart and shoved their innards down its throat. The mayor then tells you that you'll likely find the creature if you go through the nearby sewers. You're then given a key to go in, and he demands that you kill this monster. Not asks, demands. It is your job after all. Once you leave the building, you get to explore and interact with people in Tucson. I decided to talk to most of the people in town, and the first couple I spoke to were the sexy sisters. Yeah, after hearing that lovely story from the mayor, and then seeing these 2 ladies, the hack wasn't giving me a good impression. But I brushed it off and explored Tucson. What I found most interesting was when you visit the preschool that Paula went to. If you talk to the people there, they'll tell you how they're feeling regarding her death. Most of the kids are naturally more oblivious to the situation and are just hoping that she'll come back. The adults, on the other hand, are very sad, of course, Paula's father especially. He ended up in a strong state of depression and eventually asked you to leave his room. Well, I also want to point out the music here. It's this screwed version of Tucson's theme that fits the more melancholy tone. Apparently it was super difficult to put new music into EarthBound hacks, so props to Toby for doing it. Oh, and there's also, this is the greatest Mexican stereotype costume ever! Like I said, this game is strange. But hey, I'm glad Toby decided to inject a bit of his own sense of humor into this hack because some of it had me laughing out loud. Can't you read? The picture on the door shows a red person wearing a dress. If you don't cross-dress, you can't come in. Parents keep freaking out about kids finding needles or metal in their Halloween candy. Creeps. Some of us like the taste. There are plenty of these ridiculous jokes that are way up my alley. I love it. Once you enter the sewer, this is when the game actually requires you to fight. You'll see that the enemies in this hack are usually twisted and grotesque versions of existing EarthBound enemies. While some of these creatures are a little too over the top for their own good, they're very well drawn. Like I said, Toby put a lot of effort into this game, and it shows in terms of visuals. In fact, when I encountered one of these zombie hippies, the atmosphere got genuinely creepy due to his lack of eyes coupled with the droning background music. However, this opening section is brutal if you're not leveled up properly. Unfortunately, the game's difficulty stays excessively high, though it's difficult in a way that's obnoxious because enemies can just kill you in a couple of hits, and it doesn't feel very fair whatsoever. It's pretty unnecessary and really could have been toned down. When you reach the end of the sewer, you get to read a text box that basically describes Varrick's thoughts on whatever is happening. They're kind of neat, but the writing is super melodramatic, which makes it kind of jarring at times. This next area is supposed to be a burned down version of Winters where monsters roam freely. Although I'm not sure if I actually like the way this place looks. I get Toby was trying to go for a moonside type of look, but I don't know, it looks kind of busy. Plus, I don't think it gives off the vibe of being burned down, but it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. Winters mainly consists of walking around and fighting enemies. There's not much to it here. You'll come across two enemies in particular, the monster and the remnants. The remnants are these deformed, melted down starmen that look pretty cool. One thing that's kind of cool about them is how they'll mutter certain phrases in between turns, similar to what Gygus would do at the end of the original EarthBound. I have no clue what any of this text really means though. Maybe the things are directly related to Gygus, but how does it know Varrick's name? I have no clue. The game never elaborates on any of this, so it's mainly just flavor text. The monsters, on the other hand, are not fun to deal with. They hit hard and can kill you very fast. I ended up going out of my way to avoid them because of this. Now, this enemy here really made me draw a line with this game. His attacks are so over the top and brutal to the point where I couldn't take it seriously at all. He'll bite your head off or tear your arms off with its freakish claws. It's just ridiculous. And yes, I get that this is a fan game and that people can do whatever the heck they want. But this is way too over the top for its own good. But some overly violent text is merely scratching the surface of how absurd this game becomes. Trust me. After going through Winters, you'll come across Dr. Andonuts' laboratory, who, for those of you who don't know, is Jeff's father. When you approach the door, another text box appears, letting you know that the creature you're after lies inside. Varrick is filled with anxiety and forces himself to open the door. There's no music in the building, and we see Dr. Andonuts himself inside. He's apparently filled with grief after the death of his son. See, in EarthBound, Dr. Andonuts built a time machine that allowed the four heroes to go back in time and defeat Gygus. But because he built the machine, he blames himself for their deaths. Varrick then finds out that he's been causing all this chaos around him, and knows he's the one he's after. Andonuts starts to flip out and begs Varrick not to kill him. He then disappears into nothingness. All you have left to do is enter a machine that apparently takes you to Magicant, which is basically a strange manifestation of someone's mind. When you enter the machine, though, you're not taken to Magicant. Instead, something pretty weird happens. All you see is a black screen and that familiar text box describing what's happening in front of you. You're in contact with the creature, who I guess is some mutated form of Dr. Andonuts. I don't really know. You have a knife in hand and are prepared to kill him. The game is urging you to do so since it is your duty as a bounty hunter. You're then given a choice. You can kill him like you're supposed to, or choose literally nothing. If you pick nothing, the game will say that you can't choose nothing. So really, you have no choice in the matter. You have to kill him. If you do so, your blade sinks into him, and he's dead. The game then makes it seem like an accomplishment. You're told that you made the right choice, and that you're brave for doing what you did. You're a true hero. The end. The game knows that you likely wanted to spare him, but you weren't allowed to. You were demanded to fulfill this goal. I'd say this section is actually executed fairly well, if a bit overly dramatic. It creates an empty feeling that makes you question your actions, but this is only one of the endings that you can get. Remember that blank option I mentioned? Well, normally you select things with the A button, but if you press the B button instead, you can avoid killing him. The game is mad at you though. You're not following orders, you're making the wrong decision. But of course, any sane person would think otherwise. You then enter Dr. Andonuts' magic ant, and this is when things get, interesting. Here you get to see what's going on inside of his mind, and why he feels the way he feels. You'll mainly be visiting this building in particular. There are 3 rooms in here, each exploring a certain aspect of Dr. Andonuts' mind. The first room transports you to a twisted version of Annette. You can't go into any buildings, and the town now has this purple and pink color palette. There's only one enemy you can find here, that being the Remember Me. It's an interesting enemy. He deals next to no damage, and the music that plays is very calm. On top of that, there are many characters from the original EarthBound wandering around here. Because the name of the enemy is Remember Me, I wonder if this has something to do with any happy memories that Dr. Andonuts has with Annette. But to my knowledge, he never had anything to do with Annette, so I don't really know. This hack doesn't explain anything, so you just have to assume. Not only that, but it's implied that Varrick is connected to Ness in some way, so perhaps all this has something to do with that? But that can't be the case, because this is Dr. Andonuts' magic ant, not Varrick's. I feel like this stuff could have had some sort of explanation, subtle or not. Without it, most of the impact is lost. You eventually make it to the meteor site, but instead of Buzz coming out of the meteor, Dr. Andonuts' wife does. She starts hovering around you and begins asking questions regarding her broken marriage. Is there something wrong with me? Is there something you're not telling me? Then a battle begins. Well, this is certainly interesting. These, body parts aren't too hard to take out, really. If you defeat the crotch, then all the other parts follow suit and die. Heck, they'll even attack each other sometimes. Although this is another point in the game where you might need to level grind, since they can kill you fast if you're too weak. Now, I'm sure you're wondering why exactly you're fighting male body parts of all things. Well, this is when the game really loses itself for me. So, Dr. Andonuts' marriage is pretty rocky, mainly because he doesn't give his wife enough attention. And according to Toby Fox himself, the reason for this is that Dr. Andonuts is a closeted homosexual. That's why the boss enemies are muscular males, and that each of their names is No, which acts as a response to all of his wife's questions. Now let's rewind here for a bit. We heard about a creature brutally murdering a girl's parents, we swam through a river of blood, we got decapitated by zombies, and now this? Depression, marital problems, psychological damage, and closeted homosexuality. Look, I do not have a problem with these themes being discussed in media. I really, truthfully don't. But it's just that the heavy subject matter is so hard to take seriously due to it being an EarthBound hack. I said that all the bloody imagery and violence was pretty overblown earlier, but it doesn't even compare to this portion of the game. I mean, the concept of exploring a broken man's mind is quite interesting on its own, and I thought some parts of the game, such as the museum, were compelling on their own. But when the game insists on dealing with these really serious themes, it falls flat. Seeing this overly dramatic story told through EarthBound sprites just comes off as, well, stupid. I cannot, and I mean cannot, take this hack seriously whatsoever. It all feels so forced. The swearing, the violence, the depressing themes are all so laughably executed, to the point where it sounds like something I'd find in a bad fan fiction. You know, that's kind of what this story feels like. An interesting narrative wrapped in a bad fan fiction. I can tell Toby was trying to write something sincere, but it just doesn't work in this context at all. But with that said, let's talk about that ending. You eventually approach an area similar to Gygas's lair from the original game. You then come face to face with Dr. Andonuts, who is now completely broken down. You then confront the id. This disgusting creature won't attack you at all. He knows you're gonna kill him, so he doesn't even try to fight back. The game tries to make you realize that what you're doing isn't right. You're killing an innocent man, but the game doesn't give you another choice. You have to do your job. Once you finish off the id, Dr. Andonuts' hatred manifests, and then the true final of the battle begins. And his dialogue is so overly vulgar, it's ridiculous. Just icing on the edgy cake, I suppose. We even get to hear the first rendition of Megalovania here, and it sounds great. When the battle finally ends, Dr. Andonuts accepts his fate and dies for good. The game doesn't make you feel good about what you've done at all. All you're left with is an empty feeling and nothing more. Though what's odd is how the game acts like you had a choice in the matter, even though you literally had to kill him in order to beat the game. I mean, the only way you could do that is just to not finish the game, but it doesn't really count. You then head back to Tucson and everything feels the same. Varrick then decides to go home and take a long-deserved rest. But then a ghost comes in and poops on you! And that's the EarthBound Halloween Hack. So, overall, this hack wasn't very good at all. In fact, I kinda hated it. The overly edgy story is so laughably executed, and the actual gameplay isn't even fun to begin with. The enemies are way too powerful, making many of the sections more annoying than they needed to be. Like, it's to the point where I literally wasn't having any fun whatsoever. The onslaught of overly difficult enemies just makes playing this hack incredibly tedious. This game does not know the meaning of the word balance, which is in my opinion one of the most important aspects of game design. If you wanted to play this game comfortably, you would have to level grind excessively. In Magicant especially, the game just becomes such a slog, to the point where I didn't even finish it. Now, I get that everyone's reviewer ethics are different, but I personally think that if a game sucks, and I've played over half of it, I think it's okay to call it quits. You can think whatever you want, but that's just me. Anyways, back to the topic at hand. I will give Toby this. From a technical standpoint, this hack is very solid. It looks and sounds good, it runs well, and there were only a few graphical errors that I saw. Despite me not liking this game, I do think this hack is decently impressive for a teenager, especially the music. Even as a teen, he could make some great tunes. So yeah, props to him. But I do see why Toby doesn't look back on this game fondly. It really doesn't have anything going for it in my opinion. Now you might be saying, but Rowe, is it fair to critique a little ROM hack some teenager made in their room so harshly? Well, first of all, I have nothing better to do. And second, Toby seemed pretty serious about it at the time. Looking back on that article, he was very earnest when discussing this game's themes and plot. So I think it's fair to judge it based on those standards. Besides, there are legitimately well-made, well-designed, and well-thought-out ROM hacks out there that are actually worth playing. EarthBound Halloween Hack just isn't one of them. Luckily, Toby Fox's visions were eventually fully realized in his first original game, Undertale. In fact, I was able to make several connections to it while playing this hack. In Undertale, the overall theme of the game is choice. And in the Halloween hack, that's also the case. But it was obviously explored in a much more interesting way in Undertale. I didn't mention it earlier, but you can find innocent men roaming around Winters. They'll actually run away from you and deal next to no damage, but you can kill them anyway. The game attempts to make you question your actions, albeit in a surface level way. but I still found it interesting that Toby had these ideas for so long. He's clearly come a long way as a writer, and I feel like this game can act as a really good timestamp, showing how far he's come. So, in that sense, this game is worth remembering, no matter how much Toby doesn't want that to happen.